Tonight, we journey into the story of Sophia, a scholar whose curiosity challenged the very power of Rome itself. She uncovered manuscripts so forbidden, so dangerous, that the church did not simply hide them. They hunted anyone who dared to read, interpret, or share their secrets. These texts spoke of civilizations erased from history, knowledge stolen from the world, and the manipulation of time and memory to keep truth under lock and key. Sophia's discoveries revealed a hidden network of scholars, alchemists, and mystics who preserved wisdom the church sought to erase. But seeking this knowledge was never safe. Those who pursued it faced betrayal, secret tribunals, and the threat of death, and many vanished without a trace. Tonight, we will follow Sophia through hidden libraries, lost cities, and coded symbols, tracing the path of a legacy that dared to defy history itself. So before we dive into the shadows of the past, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Sophia had always sensed that the world held secrets just beyond the edge of understanding, whispers hidden in the shadows of Constantinople's great walls. It was the year 478, just 2 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and the city pulsed with a strange mix of decay and brilliance. Markets overflowed with spices, silk, and copper coins, but Sophia's eyes were drawn elsewhere, to the narrow alleys where the scent of old books lingered, thick and inviting. On this day, the sun had barely risen, casting a pale golden light over the marble streets, when she first glimpsed the scroll that would change everything. It was tucked behind a stack of battered manuscripts in a forgotten corner of the Imperial Library, a place where even the librarians rarely ventured. The cover was worn, its leather cracked and blackened with age, yet it seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if it had been waiting for her specifically. Sophia's fingers trembled as she reached out and lifted the scroll from its resting place. The moment her skin brushed the parchment, a thrill ran through her, a sense of anticipation and danger entwined. She had found something forbidden, something that the Western world was not meant to remember. As she carefully unfurled the scroll, the room seemed to shrink, the noise of merchants and carts outside fading into silence. The letters on the parchment were written in an unfamiliar script, elegant and precise, forming patterns that suggested more than mere words. At first glance, they seemed like strange symbols, geometric shapes interlaced with mathematical equations and stars. Then, as her mind adjusted to the rhythm of the writing, the hidden meanings began to surface. Sophia realized this was knowledge older than the church, older than the empires themselves, a wisdom that had been buried beneath centuries of fear and dogma. Her heart pounded as she read of the cosmos, of celestial alignments, of human potential unbound by fear, sin, or authority. There were hints of civilizations lost to time, scholars who had understood the secrets of the stars and the earth, secrets now erased by those who claimed to hold divine power. The words seemed alive, each line a spark that lit up corridors of thought she had never explored. Sophia knew instinctively that this manuscript was dangerous, that anyone who discovered it might face consequences unimaginable, yet she could not turn away. Hours passed as she traced the curves of diagrams that mapped the heavens and calculated motions that no one in her world was meant to understand. She felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the silence of history that had been stolen from the Western world. Sophia realized that this scroll was a key, a doorway to truths that had been deliberately hidden, and that in her hands lay the power to awaken minds, to challenge the stories that the Church would have everyone accept as reality. She rolled the scroll carefully, pressing it to her chest, and whispered to herself that this was only the beginning, the first step toward uncovering a wisdom the world had long forgotten. The night air in Constantinople carried the faint scent of salt from the Bosporus, and the distant calls of merchants closing their stalls. It was the year 478, and the city slept uneasily, its streets quiet except for the occasional clatter of hooves on stone. Sophia moved carefully, her feet silent on the narrow alleyways as she approached the hidden entrance to the monastery, a place whispered about among scholars, but spoken of openly by none. The door was small, almost invisible, concealed beneath ivy and shadows, and as she pressed her hand against the rough wood, she felt a shiver of anticipation. Beyond this door lay the Whispering Library, a repository of knowledge that the Church would never approve of, a place where the past breathed in silence. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the smell of old parchment and beeswax candles. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched endlessly, stacked with manuscripts, scrolls, and codices whose edges were browned and delicate. The Greek monks who tended the library moved like shadows, their robes whispering against stone floors as they carried texts from one corner to another. Their faces were lined with age and devotion, eyes sharp with intelligence and secrecy. Sophia stepped lightly, careful not to disturb the quiet rhythm of the place. Every corner seemed to hum with energy, as though the walls themselves remembered the voices of scholars long gone. She approached a table where an ancient manuscript rested, its leather cover embossed with symbols that mirrored those in the scroll she had found the day before. Sophia opened it, her fingers tracing the letters, feeling the pulse of knowledge beneath her skin. The text spoke of human potential, of mathematical truths, astronomical alignments, and philosophical concepts that had been deliberately hidden from the Western world. Each page was a revelation, a spark igniting a fire within her that she could neither extinguish nor ignore. She realized that this library was more than a collection of books. It was a sanctuary for the wisdom that the Church sought to control, a place where the memory of civilizations past had been preserved against the currents of time. Hours passed unnoticed as Sophia absorbed the manuscripts, her mind spinning with connections, questions, and possibilities. The monks glanced at her occasionally, nodding in silent acknowledgement, as if recognizing her thirst for understanding, her readiness to inherit the responsibility of knowledge. She found texts on geometry that mapped the stars, on medicine that healed more than just the body, and on philosophy that challenged the very notions of morality imposed by those in power. Each discovery left her more certain that knowledge could be both a weapon and a key, a force to awaken minds or to hide them in darkness. As the first light of dawn crept through narrow slits in the stone walls, Sophia reluctantly closed the manuscripts, feeling their weight in her arms. She understood that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The Whispering Library had revealed the magnitude of what had been lost, what had been deliberately hidden, and what might one day be reclaimed. With the scrolls tucked carefully into her satchel, she slipped back into the streets of Constantinople, carrying not only the words of ancient scholars, but the awareness that the path she had chosen would be fraught with danger, and that the pursuit of divine wisdom would demand courage, cunning, and the willingness to defy the world around her. Sophia sat alone in a dimly lit corner of the whispering library, the first rays of dawn spilling through the narrow windows and illuminating the dust particles that danced in the air. It was the year 478, and the city outside stirred with merchants and travellers, oblivious to the discoveries being made within these stone walls. She unrolled the manuscript with trembling hands, feeling as though she were holding a bridge to a world that had existed long before her own. The text was unlike anything she had seen, filled with diagrams, symbols, and patterns that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. As she traced the curves of these ancient letters, Sophia realized that the knowledge contained here predated Christianity, that it came from civilizations whose names had been erased or forgotten. The manuscript spoke first of the cosmos, of stars and planets arranged in intricate dances across the heavens. It detailed how celestial movements influence not only the tides, but also the rhythms of human thought and behavior. Sophia's mind reeled as she traced the paths of constellations, understanding that those who had recorded these movements had possessed a depth of observation that surpassed even the scholars of her own time. This was not superstition or mythology, but careful study, mathematics and philosophy intertwined in ways she had never imagined. The text suggested that understanding the universe required both logic and intuition, that the mind itself could be trained to perceive patterns invisible to the uninitiated. As she turned the pages, Sophia encountered sections on geometry that were equally astounding. Shapes and lines were drawn with precision, revealing the sacred ratios that connected the heavens and the earth. Triangles, circles, and spirals were more than aesthetic constructs. They were keys to understanding harmony, balance, and the hidden forces that shaped matter and energy. Sophia realized that these geometric principles had once guided architects, builders, and artisans who created structures that aligned with the cosmos itself. The manuscripts hinted that these techniques had been deliberately hidden or suppressed by those who feared the knowledge might empower ordinary people. The final section of the manuscript explored the powers of the human mind. It described exercises for memory, concentration, and perception that allowed individuals to expand their consciousness and perceive truths beyond ordinary experience. Sophia felt a thrill of fear and excitement as she recognized that this knowledge was dangerous in the eyes of the Church, that it challenged the authority of those who claimed to hold the only key to understanding the world. Every word, every symbol, every diagram was a reminder that humanity had once possessed the ability to see clearly, to think independently, and to comprehend mysteries that were now obscured by centuries of imposed ignorance. Hours passed unnoticed as Sophia absorbed the text, her heart racing with the enormity of what she had discovered. The manuscript was a map of a lost world, a blueprint for wisdom that had been deliberately concealed. She rolled it carefully, pressing it to her chest, and whispered to herself that she could never return to ignorance. The secrets of the ancients had chosen her, and with that knowledge came a responsibility she could neither ignore nor relinquish. The evening air in Constantinople was cool, and carried a hint of the sea as Sophia walked the narrow streets, the manuscript hidden safely beneath her cloak. It was the year 478, and shadows stretched long across the marble and stone, twisting with the flickering torchlight from distant lanterns. She felt the weight of the ancient knowledge pressing against her, a presence that seemed alive and aware of the world outside the library walls. The city had grown quiet, the usual chatter of merchants replaced by a tense stillness that made her heart beat faster. Sophia sensed, without knowing how, that she was being watched. The warning arrived in the form of a man who appeared as suddenly as a shadow falling across her path. He was tall and cloaked in black, his hood concealing most of his face, leaving only piercing eyes visible in the dim light. He moved with the ease of one who knew the alleys and rooftops of the city intimately, appearing both everywhere and nowhere. Sophia froze, unsure whether to trust him, and he spoke in a low, urgent tone that carried across the narrow street. He warned her that the church considered her studies dangerous, that the manuscripts she carried were seen as heresy, and that those who pursued such forbidden knowledge risked far more than the loss of books. He told her of scholars and monks who had vanished in the night, accused of reading texts that were not sanctioned, of questions that could not be asked aloud. Their names had been erased, their works burned or hidden in secret vaults deep beneath Rome. The messenger's voice carried a weight that chilled Sophia. She understood that the curiosity she had always cherished was now a threat, not only to her own life, but to anyone she might confide in. Knowledge, he said, was a dangerous gift, and in the eyes of the church, even the smallest spark of forbidden wisdom could ignite wrath beyond measure. Sophia listened, feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The warning was clear, yet it did not deter her. The messenger handed her a small, folded note, the edges worn and brittle, containing instructions on where she might hide the most sensitive texts and how to move through the city without being seen. He disappeared as silently as he had arrived, leaving her with a growing sense of urgency and the realization that the path she had chosen was fraught with peril. Every step she took now carried consequences, and the world she'd once explored with curiosity and wonder had become a maze of shadows and suspicion. That night, Sophia returned to her small room, the manuscript close against her chest. The words she'd read and the diagrams she had studied now seemed more alive than ever, and the warnings she had received only heightened their importance. She knew that the knowledge of the ancients was a force that could not be ignored, that it had been preserved for a reason, and that she had been chosen to protect it. And in the quiet darkness, as the city slept around her, Sophia made a vow to pursue the secrets hidden within the scrolls, even if doing so meant facing the full wrath of the church and the shadows that now hunted her every step. The city of Constantinople trembled with unrest in the year 478, its streets alive with the distant cries of soldiers and the murmurs of citizens unsure of what the future held. Sophia could feel the tension pressing against her skin like a living thing, the air heavy with fear and suspicion. Rumors of plots and uprisings spread quickly, and whispers reached even the quiet corners where she had once thought herself safe. She knew that the knowledge she carried, the fragments of forbidden texts she had carefully preserved, couldn't remain in the city. The manuscript pulsed beneath her cloak as if it understood the danger she now faced. Sophia packed what she could, folding the precious scrolls with meticulous care, and wrapping them in cloth to protect them from prying eyes. Every step she took through the narrow alleys carried the weight of urgency, each shadow a potential threat. She avoided the main roads where soldiers patrolled, and the markets that were filled with watchful merchants. Her heart raced as she moved through familiar streets that now seemed alien and threatening. The golden light of the early morning doing little to ease the tension that clung to her like a second skin. As she reached the edge of the city, she paused to listen, the distant clang of metal and shouted orders echoing through the stone walls. Sophia knew that if she were caught with the manuscripts, the consequences would be dire. She thought of the scholars whose lives had been erased, the monks who had disappeared for simply preserving knowledge, and she understood that her flight was not only for her own survival, but for the survival of the wisdom she now carried. Each fragment of the texts held centuries of thought, secrets of the cosmos, the earth, and the mind itself, and she would not allow them to vanish into darkness. The path ahead was uncertain, leading into forests and along hidden roads known only to those who moved in secret. Sophia moved swiftly and silently, guided by the faint light of the moon and the distant stars above, symbols of the very knowledge she sought to protect. Her thoughts raced as she considered the world she had left behind, the city of Constantinople, with its towering walls, its bustling streets, and the safety that now seemed impossibly distant. Every step was a choice, a commitment to a journey that would take her far from the familiar and into the unknown, a journey where the preservation of wisdom outweighed fear and comfort. By the time the sun rose high in the sky, painting the city in hues of gold and crimson, Sophia had crossed the outskirts of Constantinople, leaving behind the danger and the familiar streets she had known. The fragments of the forbidden texts remained with her, a fragile but potent link to the ancients and their lost knowledge. She knew that her journey would be long and fraught with peril, that the Church's reach extended far and wide, and that those who sought to erase the past would not rest. Yet, within her burned a determination as fierce as the rising sun. Sophia understood that knowledge was not meant to be hidden in shadows, and she vowed that wherever she went, the wisdom she carried would endure. Sophia trudged up the winding paths of the Apennines in the year 478, the morning mist clinging to her cloak and chilling her to the bone. The mountains were quiet, except for the whisper of the wind through twisted pines and the distant call of a hawk circling above. She had fled Constantinople with nothing but her satchel of ancient manuscripts and the knowledge that the Church was searching for her. Every step toward the remote monastery felt like a step into a different world, one where time slowed and the air itself seemed charged with a kind of hidden purpose. The monastery emerged from the mist like a vision of stone and shadow, its walls weathered and covered with ivy, the towers reaching toward the sky as if in silent prayer. The monks who lived here were few in number, their lives dedicated to preserving what the world sought to forget. As Sophia approached, she felt the weight of centuries pressing down, a sense that these walls had seen the rise and fall of empires, had sheltered knowledge too dangerous for the outside world. The heavy wooden doors opened before her knock, as if expecting her arrival, revealing a courtyard lined with cloisters and the soft echo of footsteps on stone. Inside, the monastery smelled of candle wax, old wood, and parchment. Rows of manuscripts were stacked on tables and shelves, some bound in leather cracked with age, others carefully wrapped in cloth for protection. The monks moved silently among the stacks, their robes whispering against the stone floors. Sophia was guided to a small chamber where she could rest and examine her own texts. She unrolled the manuscripts, feeling the thrill of connection with the scholars of the past, and realized that she was among those who had dedicated their lives to the same mission. Knowledge, preserved in secrecy, was their calling. The monks spoke little, but watched her with quiet intensity, their eyes reflecting wisdom earned through years of careful study and patient observation. They showed her manuscripts of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, texts that had been hidden from the Western world for centuries. Sophia marveled at the diagrams of the stars, the formulas describing the motion of planets, and the philosophical reflections on the human mind and spirit. Each text was a revelation, a reminder that the knowledge of the ancients had never truly vanished, only concealed from those who might misuse it or be deemed unworthy of understanding. Days turned into weeks as Sophia settled into the rhythm of the monastery. She copied passages, translated symbols, and learned to navigate the coded language of the manuscripts. The monks instructed her in patience and secrecy, teaching her that preserving wisdom required discipline as much as courage. The monastery became her sanctuary, a place where curiosity was not punished but honored, where questions were encouraged and the thirst for understanding nurtured. Sophia understood that this refuge was fragile, that the world outside could not yet know of its existence, and that the knowledge she now held was both a gift and a responsibility. She vowed to protect it, to study it, and to carry its lessons forward, even if the path ahead remained shadowed with danger and uncertainty. Sophia spent long hours in the Monastery of Silence in the year 478, her fingers tracing the intricate symbols on the ancient manuscripts as candlelight flickered across the worn pages. Each curve, each mark seemed to pulse with meaning, as if the ancients had imbued the parchment with more than ink, a secret rhythm meant only for those patient enough to see it. She had learned to read the ordinary words easily, but the coded passages were different, requiring her mind to move in patterns unfamiliar, to connect stars with letters and numbers with ideas. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. The manuscripts revealed histories that had been carefully hidden, accounts of civilizations erased from the timeline by those who claimed divine authority. Sophia discovered records of rulers, philosophers, and scholars whose names no longer appeared in any known chronicle. There were descriptions of technologies and medicines that seemed impossible, of astronomical calculations far beyond what her contemporaries believed achievable. With every page she deciphered, she realized that the world had been deliberately misled, that knowledge had been manipulated to serve power rather than enlightenment. She worked in silence, her only companions the monks who moved like shadows through the stone halls, occasionally offering guidance or pointing her toward a related manuscript. One passage described a council of scholars who had attempted to preserve the truths of the past after a great empire had fallen, knowing that the emerging powers would seek to erase their work. Symbols were used to encode dates, locations, and techniques, hiding them from anyone who lacked the understanding to decode the meaning. Sophia felt a shiver run through her as she recognized the brilliance of these methods, the subtle genius of those who had outwitted time itself. As days turned into nights, Sophia pieced together fragments of a history that had been rewritten. The Church, she learned, had been meticulous in shaping collective memory, determining what could be known and what must remain forgotten. Records of discoveries, advancements, and even entire cities had been carefully removed or rewritten. Manuscripts were copied with changes, erasing the names of inventors and attributing their work to saints or miraculous intervention. Sophia realized that her own curiosity, now sharpened by the manuscripts, was a threat to the very structure of authority, for she saw the hidden truths that many believed were lost forever. The more she decoded, the more Sophia understood that knowledge was not neutral, that power had always been linked to who controlled memory. She found mathematical codes in the margins that described the motion of planets and the cycles of the sun, evidence that ancient astronomers had understood phenomena centuries before. Modern science would rediscover them. There were diagrams of the human mind and body, instructions for enhancing memory and perception, and philosophical treatises that challenged accepted doctrines. Each discovery was a key, unlocking a door into a past carefully hidden, and Sophia felt both exhilarated and burdened. By the end of one long night, she leaned back, exhausted, the candle guttering beside her. The cipher of God was no simple code. It was a map of humanity's lost wisdom, a blueprint of the manipulation and preservation of knowledge across centuries. Sophia understood that she was no longer just a student of the past. She was a guardian of truths that could shake the foundations of the world, a keeper of secrets that the powerful would kill to remain hidden. And with that understanding, her resolve deepened, knowing that her journey had only just begun. Far to the west, in the year 478, the halls of the early Roman Church were alive with whispers and quiet footsteps that carried more weight than the clang of bells. Agents moved through shadowed corridors, their eyes sharp and their purpose clear. They had been sent from the highest authority to track a scholar whose curiosity had drawn her too close to forbidden knowledge. Sophia's name was now known in secret, her movements recorded and followed by those who understood that the manuscripts she carried were more than paper and ink. They were a threat to the carefully constructed power of Rome. The agents moved like spectres through the city, blending with merchants, labourers, and travellers. Their instructions were precise: intercept, retrieve, or destroy anything that could undermine the authority of the Church. The manuscripts were said to contain wisdom older than the papacy itself, secrets that, if revealed, would challenge the very foundation of the institution. They understood that Sophia's discovery was not merely academic, it was dangerous. Each step they took was measured, each shadow they passed was a witness to the silent hunt that had begun. Back in the monastery of the Apennines, Sophia remained unaware of the eyes watching her from afar. She worked diligently, deciphering the coded passages of the manuscripts, feeling the thrill of unlocking truths lost to the Western world. But the manuscripts hummed with tension, as if sensing the approach of those who would see them disappear forever. She had heard stories of scholars who vanished in the night, of entire libraries burned or hidden, and the thought of being hunted now made her pulse quicken. The agents communicated in symbols and brief messages, using codes similar to those Sophia studied in her texts. They understood the importance of secrecy, moving only when the city slept and avoiding unnecessary attention. Their search stretched from the port of Ostia to the streets of Rome itself, tracing rumors, following hints of manuscripts in hidden hands, and questioning anyone who might have glimpsed the young scholar. Every stone, every alley, every monastery was a potential hiding place, and they were determined to leave no shadow unexamined. Sophia's life became intertwined with a game of shadows she did not yet fully comprehend. The manuscripts she preserved were her only defense, a fragile link to knowledge that had survived centuries of erasure. She felt a strange connection to those who had gone before her, scholars and monks who had hidden texts and preserved wisdom in the dark. Their work was her inheritance, but inheritance came with responsibility. And now the weight of pursuit pressed down on her as heavily as the ancient stone walls around her. By nightfall, the agents had narrowed their search, piecing together patterns of movement and tracing whispers through the monasteries and cities of the Italian peninsula. Sophia's safety rested on the silence of her actions, the discretion of the monks, and the hidden paths only she could navigate. Shadows moved closer, unseen but palpable, and the first true test of her resolve approached. She understood instinctively that the pursuit would not relent, that those who sought to control history would stop at nothing to secure or destroy the manuscripts, and that her journey to preserve knowledge had entered a new and dangerous phase. Sophia sat at the worn wooden table in the monastery. The year 478, candlelight flickering across the pages of the manuscripts she had carried so far. Her fingers traced the intricate shapes drawn long before Christianity had taken root. Spirals, triangles, and circles that seemed alive with meaning. These were not mere drawings, but diagrams designed to reveal the hidden patterns of the cosmos and the earth, a language of power that pre-Christian civilizations had once understood. As she copied them carefully, she felt a connection to those long-vanished scholars, their thoughts echoing across centuries in the curves and angles on the parchment. The diagrams mapped the stars with precision, showing alignments that controlled not only the movements of celestial bodies, but the flow of energy on Earth itself. Sophia's eyes widened as she realized that the ancients had understood a harmony between the heavens and human existence, a knowledge that allowed them to build cities, temples, and monuments that aligned perfectly with the cycles of the sun and moon. Each figure she reconstructed revealed relationships between geometry, astronomy, and even human consciousness, suggesting that understanding the universe required both intellect and intuition. She studied the ratios and angles repeatedly, noting how the smallest shift could change the meaning entirely. It was as if the diagrams were alive, responding to the observer, and she felt a thrill of excitement as she uncovered layers of meaning hidden within the lines. The geometry explained not only physical structures, but also philosophical principles, showing that the ancients had encoded wisdom into their architecture and mathematics, a secret map of the universe that only those with patience and insight could read. The manuscripts revealed techniques for aligning buildings to celestial events, for creating structures that amplified sound and light, and for harnessing natural forces in ways modern engineers could scarcely imagine. Sophia understood that the pre-Christian civilizations had mastered these arts to harmonize life with the cosmos, to elevate human understanding and capability. This knowledge had been deliberately hidden, preserved only in secret, and she knew that the Church would view it as dangerous because it challenged the narrative of divine control and human limitation. Hours passed as Sophia reconstructed diagram after diagram, translating symbols and connecting concepts across texts. Her understanding deepened with every line, every curve, and she began to see patterns that suggested a hidden order to history itself, a logic that had been obscured by centuries of selective memory and suppression. These were not just diagrams of shapes and stars, they were keys to understanding the forces that had guided civilizations, knowledge that could illuminate the past and inform the future. As dawn broke over the mountains, casting a pale light into the monastery, Sophia leaned back and studied her work. The forbidden geometry had opened a window into a world long concealed, revealing the extraordinary power that had once been wielded by human hands and minds. She felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her shoulders, understanding that to preserve and share this knowledge would require courage and cunning, and that the secrets she now held were as dangerous as they were beautiful. Yet, she could not turn away, for the diagrams whispered of a truth too profound to ignore, a wisdom that had survived centuries of silence, waiting for someone to uncover it once more. Sophia sat alone in the quiet chamber of the monastery in the year 478, her eyes fixed on the pages of a manuscript that seemed older than time itself. The candlelight flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that danced like spirits around her. As she traced the words and symbols, she began to notice something extraordinary. References appeared to beings of immense knowledge, ancient figures whose wisdom had been so powerful that it had been feared, erased, and hidden by the church. The manuscripts called them Nephilim, a name whispered across centuries and now resurfacing before her eyes. Her heart pounded as she read descriptions of these beings, not as monstrous creatures, but as extraordinary humans or semi-divine figures who had mastered the arts of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Their insights had shaped civilizations, guided rulers, and created structures and instruments that defied ordinary understanding. Sophia could feel the weight of their presence in the manuscript, a sense that they had once walked among mortals, leaving knowledge behind like breadcrumbs through history. The church had labeled them dangerous, heretical, and had worked tirelessly to erase their traces, rewriting the narrative to suppress their influence. Sophia's mind raced as she considered the implications. If the Nephilim had existed, their wisdom could explain the advanced understanding of the ancients that she had seen in the geometry and manuscripts she had studied. It could explain technologies, techniques, and knowledge that had seemed impossible for civilizations so long ago. She realized that the deliberate erasure of the Nephilim from history was part of a larger effort to control knowledge, to shape humanity's perception of what was possible, and to monopolize the authority of truth through fear and doctrine. She studied diagrams and annotations attributed to the Nephilim, their symbols intertwined with celestial charts and human anatomy, revealing an understanding of the cosmos and the mind far beyond the capabilities of her contemporaries. The manuscripts hinted that they had been teachers, philosophers, and engineers who had shared knowledge selectively, guiding the development of societies while remaining hidden themselves. Sophia felt a mixture of awe and fear, knowing that she had stumbled upon a history that the world was never meant to see, a truth carefully buried beneath layers of suppression. The more she uncovered, the more Sophia understood that the echoes of the Nephilim had persisted despite the church's efforts. Their influence could be found in fragments of architecture, in texts preserved in secret, and in the hidden traditions of distant lands. She realized that she now carried a responsibility similar to theirs, to preserve and protect knowledge that could awaken understanding, but also draw danger. The shadows of the church were long, and the agents tracking her would not forgive the exposure of these truths. As the first light of dawn seeped through the narrow windows, Sophia closed the manuscript carefully, feeling its power hum against her hands. The Nephilim were not myths, nor were they distant legends. Their wisdom had been real, feared, and deliberately erased. Sophia knew that in discovering them, she had stepped into a web of secrecy and danger, and that the path ahead would demand courage, cunning, and the determination to keep their knowledge alive for generations yet to come. The year was 478, and the monastery lay quiet beneath the silver light of a crescent moon. Sophia had been studying the manuscripts for weeks, tracing symbols, decoding diagrams, and feeling the pulse of ancient knowledge in her fingertips. One evening, a figure appeared at the monastery gate, cloaked and carrying a small bundle of instruments that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. The monks whispered of him as a wandering alchemist, a man who had travelled across lands few dared to see, carrying secrets older than the kingdoms of men. He was here for Sophia, drawn to her curiosity and the manuscripts she protected. The alchemist led her to a secluded chamber, its walls lined with glass vials, astrolabes, and copper instruments that reflected the candlelight. The air smelled of herbs, metal, and a faint ozone tang, as though the room itself contained a spark of energy waiting to be awakened. He spoke in measured tones, explaining that knowledge was not only meant to be read, but applied, that the manuscripts contained not just theory, but practical wisdom to understand the stars, heal the body, and harness the unseen energies of the world. Sophia listened intently, her mind alight with questions and anticipation. He began with astronomy, showing her how the positions of the planets and stars could be used to predict seasons, tides, and even human behavior. Sophia traced the celestial diagrams on a large parchment, her fingers moving along lines that connected constellations with geometric precision. The alchemist explained that ancient scholars and even the Nephilim had used these alignments to guide agriculture, navigation, and timing of important decisions. Sophia felt a thrill as the mysteries she had read about came to life, the sky itself revealing its hidden patterns to those who knew how to look. Next, he guided her through the manuscripts of medicine. Herbs, minerals, and complex mixtures were not just remedies, but expressions of energy and balance within the human body. Sophia learned to understand how the mind and body were connected, how observation, timing, and intention could influence healing. The alchemist demonstrated simple procedures, showing that knowledge preserved in secrecy had immense power when applied with care. Sophia realized that the wisdom of the ancients was practical as well as profound, a tool to shape the world rather than merely observe it. Finally, he revealed the lessons of energy, the unseen forces that connected everything from the stars to the earth to the body and mind. Sophia learned to feel subtle currents, to observe the flow of energy through natural forms, and to understand that knowledge itself could be a kind of power, something to be guided responsibly. She felt the manuscripts vibrate in her hands, as though confirming the alchemist's words, whispering that wisdom was alive and that the universe responded to those who sought it with reverence and diligence. When the night ended and dawn crept across the mountains, Sophia felt changed. The manuscripts were no longer merely texts to study. They were guides, alive with the practical applications of the knowledge that had been hidden, feared, and erased. She understood now that she could use the wisdom to navigate the world, protect the knowledge, and continue the legacy of those who had preserved it. The alchemist's secret was hers to carry, a key that would unlock the power of the ancients while walking the dangerous path ahead. The year was 478, and Sophia had begun to understand that the knowledge she carried was more than powerful. It was dangerous. The monastery in the Apennines offered safety, but the world beyond its stone. Walls was a place where curiosity could mean death. One evening, under the cover of twilight, the wandering alchemist guided her through a hidden passage behind the chapel, down winding steps carved into the mountain, until they arrived at a chamber lit only by flickering torches. Here, Sophia would meet the Council of Shadows, a secret network of scholars and mystics who had dedicated their lives to preserving wisdom while remaining unseen by the Church. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with shelves filled with manuscripts, astrolabes, and instruments of strange and ancient design. Figures cloaked in dark robes moved quietly, their faces concealed. Yet Sophia sensed the intensity of minds honed by study and secrecy. The alchemist introduced her cautiously, explaining that each member had survived centuries of persecution, learning to hide in plain sight while safeguarding the knowledge that rulers and priests sought to erase. Sophia felt both awe and fear as the gravity of the council's work became clear. One elder, a woman whose eyes gleamed with intelligence, spoke first, welcoming Sophia and explaining that the manuscripts she carried were part of a larger tapestry, fragments of human understanding deliberately scattered to survive the ambitions of power. They described how the council operated in silence, exchanging knowledge through coded letters, secret meetings, and carefully concealed symbols in public spaces. Sophia realized that these methods mirrored the ciphers and diagrams she had been deciphering, that the wisdom of the ancients had not only been preserved, but had taught its protectors how to survive and conceal it. The council revealed that their purpose was not rebellion, but stewardship. They did not seek to overthrow the church, but to ensure that knowledge survived for future generations, that truth would not vanish even if the world believed it had. Sophia felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She understood that she was now part of a lineage of guardians, a network that stretched across cities and mountains, all dedicated to protecting humanity's forgotten wisdom. They showed her manuscripts that contained astronomical charts, medical treatments, and philosophical treatises that had been erased from public memory. Sophia marveled at the precision of their work, the way ancient knowledge had been encoded and transmitted, ensuring that even in the face of suppression, it could survive. She realized that the Council of Shadows had become a lifeline, connecting her to a web of minds across time, a hidden network that balanced secrecy with preservation. As the meeting ended and Sophia emerged from the hidden passage into the moonlit courtyard, she understood that her journey had changed. She was no longer alone, and the manuscripts she carried were no longer simply her responsibility. She had joined a lineage of guardians, a silent resistance that protected truth in the shadows. The Council of Shadows had given her not only allies, but purpose, and she knew that the path ahead would be treacherous, yet illuminated by the courage of those who had fought to keep wisdom alive long before her time. Sophia unrolled a fragile scroll in the quiet chamber of the monastery, in the year 478, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the ancient parchment. The manuscript detailed the destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria, the city of scholars, where knowledge had been collected from every corner of the known world. She read of fire consuming shelves of scrolls, the smoke rising over the harbour and carrying with it the collective memory of civilizations. Names of scholars, their discoveries, and their inventions vanished in the flames, leaving only fragments for the few who had managed to escape with their lives. As Sophia studied the account, a chill ran down her spine. She recognized patterns in the text that mirrored what she had seen in the actions of Rome and the Church centuries later. Knowledge had never been destroyed for want of interest, but for control. Libraries had been erased, histories rewritten, and discoveries hidden or reinterpreted to fit narratives of authority. The manuscript described how the conquerors had sought not merely to win wars, but to erase memory, to ensure that the wisdom of previous generations couldn't challenge their dominance. Sophia felt a growing awareness that the same forces she now faced were part of a continuum stretching back through history, a methodical shaping of human memory. The scroll revealed names of works and scholars that no longer existed in any known record, their ideas deemed dangerous, heretical, or simply inconvenient. Sophia traced the lines, describing mathematical treatises, astronomical charts, and medical writings that had guided civilizations in ways she was only beginning to understand. Each loss had been a calculated blow, a silencing of knowledge to ensure that only sanctioned interpretations survived. She felt the weight of centuries pressing on her shoulders, a realization that the manuscripts she carried were not just texts, but remnants of a war over understanding itself. Sophia saw parallels with the actions of the early Roman Church, with its careful preservation of only selected texts, while others were hidden, rewritten, or destroyed. The erasure was not accidental. It was a deliberate shaping of collective memory, a way to control what people believed to be true. She understood that her work, her decoding of the manuscripts, was an act of resistance, a continuation of the struggle to keep knowledge alive against those who sought to suppress it. The echoes of Alexandria's burning were alive in her hands, reminding her that wisdom could vanish if it were not protected and carried forward. Hours passed as Sophia compared diagrams, notes, and records, tracing the hidden threads connecting ancient civilizations with the secretive networks of scholars she now belonged to. She began to see a larger story, one where power and knowledge were inseparable, where the control of information had always been the most potent form of authority. The lesson of Alexandria was clear. Knowledge left unguarded would be erased, and truth could only survive through vigilance, courage, and secrecy. As dawn broke over the Apennines, spilling light onto the monastery's stone walls, Sophia closed the manuscript carefully. She knew that history was fragile, that it could be shaped by those who held it, and erased by those who feared it. The burning of Alexandria was not just an event of the past. It was a warning, a mirror of the threats she now faced, and a call to preserve the wisdom that had survived against impossible odds. Sophia felt the responsibility settle upon her, a weight she accepted willingly, knowing that the future of hidden knowledge rested in her hands. The year was 478, and the monastery in the Apennines had become a fragile sanctuary for Sophia, a place where she could study the manuscripts and learn the secrets of the ancients. She trusted the monks and scholars who shared this mission, believing that together they could preserve knowledge against the reach of the church. Yet, one evening, as shadows lengthened across the stone floors and the wind whispered through the courtyards, that trust shattered. A close ally, someone she had confided in and relied upon, approached her with a smile that no longer reached his eyes. He spoke of a discovery he claimed to have made, a fragment of a manuscript that he insisted should be studied immediately. Sophia, eager to uncover every secret, followed him to a secluded chamber. There, he carefully revealed a portion of the text, one that shimmered with the same hidden power she had come to understand. But as she reached for it, she noticed a movement at the doorway, a flash of torchlight, and the unmistakable presence of men cloaked in the authority of the church. Her ally's face had hardened, his betrayal laid bare. He had handed the fragment to agents tracking her, providing them a key into the knowledge she had sworn to protect. Sophia's heart pounded, the manuscript clutched to her chest as she realized the depth of the danger. The agents moved swiftly, their presence like a shadow swallowing the room, and she understood that escape was her only option. She turned, weaving through corridors she had once walked with ease, relying on the hidden passages and secret stairways that the monks had shown her. Every step was measured, every breath held as she moved silently past doors and windows, her mind racing to protect the rest of the manuscripts she carried. The betrayal cut deeper than the threat itself. She had counted on loyalty, on shared purpose, yet the reality was that even those closest to her could be swayed by fear, ambition, or coercion. Sophia felt a mixture of sorrow and determination. The knowledge she preserved was too important to be lost, too vital to let betrayal stop her. She slipped into the mountain paths under the cover of darkness, the air sharp and cold against her skin, the moonlight guiding her along trails she had only known in memory. Hours passed as she fled through forests and rocky passes, the sound of pursuit echoing faintly behind her. Sophia pressed on, her mind focused on survival and the preservation of the manuscripts that remained. She hid in caves and under thick groves of trees, using every skill she had learned to evade detection. The fragment that had been stolen weighed on her, a reminder that secrecy was never absolute, that vigilance was required at every moment. By dawn, Sophia emerged from the forest onto a ridge overlooking a distant valley. She was safe for now, but the betrayal had changed everything. She realized that trust could be a weapon as easily as an ally, and that the journey to preserve the hidden wisdom of the ancients would demand greater caution, cunning, and resolve than ever before. The shadows of the church were long, but Sophia understood that she could survive them, that the manuscripts and the secrets they contained were hers to protect, and that she would continue the fight, alone if necessary. Sophia travelled cautiously across the hills and valleys of Europe in the year 479, carrying the manuscripts and fragments of ancient wisdom she had sworn to protect. Her journey took her to cities and villages where stone walls rose like sentinels over narrow streets, where churches and cathedrals dominated the skyline with spires reaching toward the heavens. She had heard whispers from the Council of Shadows, of hidden meanings embedded within the sacred architecture of Europe, symbols left by those who had preserved knowledge long before her time. These symbols were more than decoration. They were messages, clues to a secret path of wisdom waiting to be uncovered. In a quiet cloister of a Romanesque cathedral, Sophia traced her fingers along the carvings in the stone, noting patterns that repeated across arches and columns. Spirals, stars, triangles, and interlocking shapes appeared subtle at first, but as she compared them with diagrams in her manuscripts, the hidden connections became clear. Each design was deliberate, a guide for those who knew how to read the language of geometry and symbolism. She realized that architects and masons had encoded knowledge into the very structures, creating a silent map for future generations to follow, a map that bypassed the scrutiny of those who would destroy it. She journeyed to monasteries in the Apennines, cathedrals in France, and abbeys in England, following patterns that led her from one symbol to the next. In every location, she found echoes of the same message. Knowledge must be preserved. Wisdom must survive. And understanding belongs not to the powerful alone, but to those who seek it with care. Some symbols were simple, subtle lines carved into doorframes or corners of walls. Others were complex, geometric arrangements that required careful observation and insight to interpret. Sophia copied them, sketched them, and traced their meanings, feeling a connection to the hidden hands that had left them centuries before. As she pieced together the symbols, a narrative began to emerge. The carvings spoke of the Nephilim, of ancient scholars who had safeguarded knowledge, and of networks of guardians who had survived in secrecy to pass wisdom through time. Sophia saw evidence that these symbols were not isolated, that they formed a continent-wide web of messages, a path of understanding that transcended borders, languages, and centuries. Each new discovery filled her with awe and reinforced the responsibility she bore as a protector of these secrets. By the time she rested beneath the shadow of a great cathedral spire, Sophia felt the weight and promise of the path of symbols. The hidden messages of knowledge preservation were no longer distant whispers, but a living trail, guiding her through a world that had sought to erase memory and control understanding. She understood that this journey would continue, that every carved stone and every hidden arch was a lesson in patience, observation, and courage. And as the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the stone, Sophia felt that she was walking not just through Europe, but through the intentions and wisdom of generations determined to keep knowledge alive. The year was 480, and Sophia stood at the edge of a vast stone building in Rome, the early morning fog curling around the steps like silent sentinels. Beyond those walls lay the Vatican archives, a place shrouded in secrecy, where centuries of manuscripts were stored far from the eyes of the public. Sophia had studied maps, spoken to allies in hidden networks, and followed the whispers of those who had glimpsed forbidden knowledge. Now she would enter the archives herself, not as a guest, but as a seeker of truths hidden beneath layers of official history. The entrance was narrow and unassuming, a small door concealed behind the folds of the cathedral walls. Sophia slipped inside, her heartbeat echoing in the quiet corridor. The scent of old parchment, ink, and polished wood filled her senses, heavy with the weight of centuries. She moved carefully, aware that even the slightest sound could betray her presence. Every step brought her closer to the manuscripts that had been erased from public memory, documents that contained truths the world was never meant to know. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched endlessly, stacked with scrolls, codices, and bound books. Sophia's eyes widened as she traced the titles, written in Latin, Greek, and other languages long forbidden to most scholars. She found manuscripts that detailed civilizations erased from history, accounts of scientific discoveries, philosophical treatises, and astronomical charts that contradicted the carefully curated narrative of the Church. It was as if a hidden history of the world had been preserved in silence, waiting for someone daring enough to uncover it. One manuscript in particular drew her attention, its edges frayed, the ink faded but still legible. It described rulers and events that were absent from official records, timelines that shifted centuries, and knowledge of the cosmos that predated the Church's own teachings. Sophia felt a chill as she read the lines, realizing that this archive contained not only lost history, but also the mechanisms through which memory and knowledge had been controlled. Every revelation reinforced what she had begun to suspect. History had been curated, edited, and sometimes fabricated to serve authority rather than truth. Hours passed as Sophia moved through the shelves, carefully examining manuscripts and making mental notes of their contents. She found records of medicine more advanced than anything practiced in her time, maps of continents unknown to official explorers, and philosophical works that questioned the very foundations of the accepted faith. The manuscripts seemed to whisper to her, revealing the depths of human knowledge that had been systematically hidden. She understood that what she had seen in this forbidden archive was both a gift and a responsibility, a secret she could neither ignore nor abandon. As dawn broke over Rome, casting golden light through high windows, Sophia carefully replaced the manuscripts and retraced her steps toward the exit. Her heart still raced with the thrill of discovery and the knowledge of danger. The Forbidden Archive had shown her a history the world had never been allowed to see, and she knew that preserving and understanding these manuscripts was essential. The truth, buried beneath centuries of secrecy, was now partially revealed, and Sophia carried it with her, aware that the journey to protect it had only grown more urgent. The year was 480, and Sophia found herself in the cold, shadowed halls of a church tribunal in Rome, the heavy doors closing behind her with a finality that made her chest tighten. Her hands were bound, and her manuscripts were gone, taken by agents of the church who had tracked her for months. She had been captured while attempting to safeguard fragments of knowledge that challenged the authority and narrative carefully maintained by the clergy. The tribunal was silent, except for the echo of footsteps and the whispered prayers of officials, and Sophia felt the full weight of centuries of power pressing down upon her. She was led to a raised dais, where men in robes, their faces stern and unreadable, sat like judges over the fate of her life. Accusations of heresy were read aloud, words that carried the authority of God and man alike. Sophia listened as they described her studies, her manuscripts, and her pursuit of forbidden wisdom as crimes against the Church, a threat to faith and order. She understood that her curiosity, once a source of wonder and discovery, had become a weapon in the eyes of those who sought to control history, knowledge, and truth itself. The trial was a spectacle of ritual, each gesture and intonation designed to reinforce the authority of the tribunal. Witnesses, some coerced, some fearful, spoke of manuscripts in her possession, of diagrams and texts that defied church doctrine. Sophia stood silently, her mind racing as she weighed her words, knowing that any defense she offered could be twisted, any truth she revealed could be used against her. The Church had mastered the art of erasure, and she was now subject to its methods, facing the possibility that her discoveries could vanish forever along with her. As the hours dragged on, Sophia reflected on the manuscripts she had carried, the knowledge of the ancients, the secrets of the Nephilim, and the hidden wisdom preserved by secret networks. She realized that she was not merely defending herself, but the survival of human understanding against forces determined to suppress it. Her heart pounded with fear, but also with resolve, the certainty that truth couldn't be extinguished even by threats of fire or imprisonment. Each question the tribunal posed, each accusation, only reinforced the importance of her mission. When the final sentence was read, Sophia braced herself. The verdict hung between life and death, the echoes of authority pressing into her very soul. She understood that the tribunal's purpose was not only punishment, but also the erasure of memory, the silencing of questions that challenged the control of knowledge. Yet, even as she was led away, her mind remained sharp, cataloguing the lessons of the trial and the patterns of suppression she had witnessed. Sophia emerged from the tribunal, her body trembling, but her spirit unbroken. She knew that the church would not relent, that the pursuit of forbidden knowledge carried danger, but also that the manuscripts she had protected, the wisdom she had uncovered, and the courage she now held were forces that could endure beyond the reach of those who sought to erase them. Her journey was far from over, and the trial had strengthened her understanding that preserving truth required unwavering courage in the face of fear and authority. The year was 480, and the scent of smoke and fear lingered in the air around the tribunal where Sophia had been held. The memory of the guards, the accusing eyes, and the weight of the church's authority pressed on her chest like a stone. She had been days away from execution, the flames of the stake already imagined by the officials who sought to erase her discoveries forever. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every breath a reminder that the knowledge she carried, the manuscripts she had sworn to protect, could vanish with her. But the world of secrecy that Sophia had glimpsed through the Council of Shadows was not powerless. Through hidden channels and coded messages, secret societies had learned of her plight. These groups, scattered across Europe and bound by the mission to preserve wisdom, moved with precision and silence. On a night shrouded in moonless darkness, a series of faint signals reached the monastery guards and monks who had hidden her manuscripts. Sophia felt a presence near her cell, a shadow that paused and listened before moving, and then a voice whispered her name with urgency and care. She followed the signal, her hands bound through a series of narrow passages she had never seen before, the walls cool and rough beneath her fingers. The air was damp and carried the faint scent of herbs and smoke from hidden fires. Her guides, cloaked and silent, led her through tunnels that twisted beneath the city, passages known only to those who had learned the secret language of survival. Every step required courage and trust, and Sophia could feel the tension of a trap waiting to spring. Yet, she also felt the thrill of escape, the knowledge that centuries of hidden networks had created a lifeline for her and the wisdom she carried. Outside the walls, horses waited in shadows, their breath steaming in the cool night air. Sophia mounted quickly, the guides signaling with subtle gestures to avoid detection by the patrols and church agents that still searched the streets above. The city slept, oblivious to the escape unfolding beneath and around it. As the horses galloped through quiet lanes and over hidden bridges, Sophia clutched the manuscripts close to her chest, feeling the pulse of history within their pages. Every moment she survived was a victory for knowledge, a defiance of those who sought to erase it. Hours later, they reached a safe house far beyond the city walls, hidden in a grove of olive trees where the wind whispered through the leaves. Sophia dismounted, her body weary, but her mind alive with possibility. The escape had not only saved her life, but also strengthened her understanding of the vast network of guardians who operated in the shadows. She realized that knowledge was power, and that survival required both cunning and courage. The manuscripts remained intact, their secrets still waiting to be uncovered, and Sophia knew that her quest would continue, guided by those who had protected wisdom through centuries of danger and silence. By dawn, as the first light touched the grove, Sophia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced death, narrowly avoided the flames, and now carried the weight of knowledge that could reshape understanding itself. The philosophers and guardians of the past had survived to pass wisdom to her, and she vowed to continue their mission. The journey ahead would be perilous, but Sophia understood that truth couldn't be destroyed by fear, and that she was now part of a lineage determined to protect and preserve what history had tried to erase. The year was 481, and Sophia had travelled across the hills and cities of Italy, carrying her manuscripts and the weight of centuries of hidden knowledge. She had witnessed the preservation of wisdom in secret chambers, the ciphers etched into stone, and the manuscripts carefully protected from the eyes of those who sought to control history. Now, as she studied the texts and compared them with records of what the world would later call the Renaissance, a startling realization emerged. Much of what the world celebrated as rediscovery and innovation had been orchestrated, carefully guided by the selective release of knowledge by the Church. She pored over manuscripts detailing mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, noting how their timing aligned with political and religious needs. Certain discoveries, long hidden, suddenly appeared in the hands of artists, scientists, and scholars, at precisely the moments when the Church could claim control over their interpretation. Sophia traced diagrams of machines and astronomical instruments that predated their supposed invention by centuries, seeing how the Church had allowed fragments to surface while keeping the full extent of knowledge concealed. The Renaissance, she realized, was not an explosion of accidental genius, but a carefully staged unfolding of human understanding, guided from behind the scenes. In Florence, she examined texts that described painting techniques and anatomical studies that the Church had once suppressed, discovering that the techniques credited to Renaissance masters had existed in older manuscripts long before. Sculptors, painters, and engineers were given access to select pieces of wisdom, guided subtly to create marvels that reinforced the narrative of rediscovery, while the manuscripts she now carried contained entire libraries of knowledge never revealed to the public. Sophia understood that the Church had curated both what could be known and who could know it, orchestrating an era of apparent enlightenment while maintaining control over the true sources of wisdom. She traced the movements of secretive monastic orders and scholars who had preserved manuscripts across Italy and beyond. These guardians had carefully handed out knowledge in doses, ensuring that society believed progress was a natural awakening, when in truth it was strategically guided. Sophia compared the works of artists, mathematicians, and scientists, finding that the most celebrated innovations coincided with the availability of specific manuscripts, maps, and diagrams released under church supervision. The pattern was undeniable, a map of controlled enlightenment stretching across time and geography. Sophia felt a mixture of awe and frustration as she realized the implications. Humanity had been capable of great knowledge for centuries, yet much of it had been hidden, delayed, and selectively shared. The Renaissance, celebrated as a triumph of human creativity, was in part a performance orchestrated to reinforce the Church's authority while shaping the perception of history. Sophia understood that her role was now clearer than ever. She was part of the lineage of guardians, tasked not only with preserving knowledge, but also with revealing the patterns hidden behind the carefully constructed narrative. As dusk fell over Florence, Sophia looked out across the city and imagined the minds of those who had unknowingly danced to the rhythm of the manuscripts. She realized that history was rarely accidental, and that the true story of human progress had been curated for centuries. The Renaissance was both a triumph and a reminder that knowledge could be both a gift and a tool of control. Sophia held her manuscripts closer, knowing that understanding these secrets was essential, and that the mission to uncover the hidden truths of history had only grown more urgent. The year was 482, and Sophia studied maps that had survived centuries of secrecy, their edges frayed, ink faded, yet brimming with secrets. Each parchment revealed outlines of cities that no longer existed, places whose names had vanished from history and whose achievements had been erased. She traced rivers, walls, and plazas with her fingers, noticing patterns of architecture and infrastructure that suggested these civilizations had been far more advanced than what the official records allowed. The manuscripts implied that Europe had not fallen into a simple dark age, but that entire societies had been deliberately hidden from memory. Sophia compared the maps to the manuscripts she had carried for years, noticing recurring symbols and annotations that indicated trade routes, astronomical observatories, and centers of learning that had flourished long before the Church had consolidated power. Some cities were shown with structures that mirrored Roman engineering, yet far more complex, with aqueducts, fortified libraries, and astronomical towers designed to measure celestial movements with precision. She realized that the knowledge of these lost civilizations had been carefully erased, their memory replaced with tales of barbarism and decline, a narrative that served the Church's authority and obscured human achievement. In one manuscript, Sophia found descriptions of urban planning that were astonishing. Streets aligned with solar and lunar cycles, central plazas designed to amplify sound, and water systems that distributed resources efficiently across entire settlements. These were not primitive societies, as the textbook suggested, but thriving hubs of science, art, and culture. Sophia's mind raced with questions. How had these cities disappeared without leaving a trace in mainstream history? Who had the power to remove their memory so completely that even scholars centuries later could doubt their existence? The answer, she realized, lay in the same hands that had orchestrated the narrative of the Renaissance and controlled the manuscripts she now protected. The maps also revealed hidden symbols, secret markings, that indicated where knowledge had been preserved. Sophia noted locations of subterranean vaults, libraries hidden beneath hills, and monuments that had been repurposed or destroyed to erase their original purpose. The civilization itself had been silenced, yet it left breadcrumbs for those who knew how to read the language of secrecy. Sophia felt a chill, understanding that she was following a trail left not for the curious masses, but for a select few who could continue the work of preservation and revelation. By nightfall, Sophia had catalogued dozens of lost cities, their positions stretching across the European landscape. She realized that her journey was no longer only about decoding manuscripts or evading church agents. It was about restoring memory to a continent that had been systematically stripped of its past. Each map, each fragment of record, was a key to understanding human potential and the deliberate suppression of knowledge. Sophia held the parchments close, knowing that the lost cities weren't merely forgotten places, but a testament to the ingenuity and power of civilizations erased by design, and that her mission to reveal them was far from complete. The year was 483, and Sophia had begun to notice patterns that disturbed her more than the hidden manuscripts or the lost cities. The church, she realized, didn't merely control knowledge and memory, but also the very flow of time itself. Calendars had been adjusted, events shifted, and records rewritten so that generations would believe history unfolded in the way the authorities desired. Sophia studied the documents carefully, tracing the corrections, additions, and erasures that suggested time had been curated, edited, and in some cases fabricated to fit a narrative of power and control. She traced the Julian calendar reforms and the later adjustments that led to the Gregorian system, noting how certain years seemed compressed or expanded, events duplicated or omitted entirely. Kings and popes appeared in sequences that aligned too perfectly. Battles and discoveries repeated under different names, and entire centuries seemed to lack corroboration from independent sources. Sophia felt a shiver as she understood the implications. If time could be shaped by those who controlled records, then history itself could be manipulated, and the collective memory of humanity could be guided like a river flowing through invisible dams. Manuscripts in the Vatican's archives described astronomical observations, eclipses, and planetary cycles. Yet, Sophia noticed discrepancies when she cross-referenced these events with her calculations. The stars did not lie, but the records had been adjusted. Celestial events, recorded in distant lands such as China and Persia, did not align with European accounts, revealing gaps, shifts, and edits that could not be explained by natural error. Sophia realized that the Church had used its knowledge of astronomy not only to predict events, but to regulate what history would record, to enforce the perception of continuity, and to conceal centuries of human achievement. The implications for knowledge were profound. Sophia understood that the manipulation of calendars was not an abstract exercise, but a tool to control society. By dictating the timing of festivals, the recording of victories, and the sequencing of reigns, the Church could enforce a perception of order that justified its authority. Generations grew up believing that certain events had occurred when they may not have, that centuries of human ingenuity had been lost or compressed, and that only the sanctioned narrative held truth. Sophia felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her as she realized the magnitude of this control. She pored over maps and chronicles, piecing together patterns of repetition and anomaly, discovering that some rulers were duplicates, their achievements copied from predecessors under new names, and that certain inventions and discoveries had been shifted forward in time to appear as sudden breakthroughs. The archives revealed deliberate omissions and selective preservation, a shaping of history as much as the preservation of manuscripts. As night fell over the Apennines, Sophia sat alone by the candlelight, manuscripts spread before her. She understood that the control of time was the ultimate authority, for it allowed the Church not merely to shape belief, but to guide perception across generations. The Keeper of Time had wielded power beyond sword or decree, bending the very framework of human memory. Sophia knew that if she were to preserve true knowledge, she would have to navigate not only the dangers of secrecy and betrayal, but also the illusions of time itself, and that her quest had grown more complex, more urgent, and infinitely more perilous. The year was 484, and Sophia had begun to realize that her journey through manuscripts, lost cities, and manipulated calendars was only part of a larger web of secrecy. Whispers and coded messages led her to meetings in shadowed rooms, hidden beneath the streets of Florence, Venice, and distant towns across Europe. Here she encountered members of clandestine societies, groups that had survived the Church's scrutiny for centuries, dedicated to safeguarding forbidden knowledge. Among them were Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and alchemists, each devoted to preserving wisdom that the world was not yet ready to see. The Freemasons welcomed her with cautious respect, showing symbols carved into stone, hidden codes embedded in cathedral arches, and plans for buildings that concealed knowledge in geometry, proportion, and alignment. Sophia traced the shapes and patterns, understanding that these weren't merely decorations, but a language of preservation. Each square, each compass, each spiral told a story of human ingenuity that had been deliberately hidden from the masses. She realized that the Freemasons had been a network of guardians, engineers, and scholars, ensuring that knowledge survived even when history sought to erase it. The Rosicrucians, mysterious and philosophical, guided Sophia through texts that blended science, metaphysics, and the ancient traditions of Egypt and Babylon. They spoke of cycles of knowledge, of the importance of secrecy to protect wisdom from those who would misuse it, and of the legacy of the Nephilim and other ancient teachers. Sophia learned that symbols, coded manuscripts, and oral instruction had allowed these ideas to endure, traveling from one generation to the next, even as official histories misrepresented or ignored them. The Rosicrucians showed her how understanding the hidden meanings could illuminate connections across centuries, revealing a network of knowledge that spanned continents. Alchemists, with their instruments and strange mixtures, taught Sophia that transformation was not only about chemistry, but also about understanding the underlying principles of the universe. They revealed methods to observe the stars, manipulate energies, and comprehend the natural world in ways that were invisible to ordinary scholars. Sophia began to see that the alchemists, the Freemasons, and the Rosicrucians were not separate entities, but part of a greater hidden network, each contributing to a shared mission: to preserve knowledge, guide humanity, and protect the wisdom that had been deliberately suppressed. Sophia felt a deep sense of belonging as she walked through these secret halls, feeling the pulse of centuries of careful work and sacrifice. Each member she met carried fragments of knowledge, a piece of a puzzle that the Church had long sought to control. Together, they represented the continuity of wisdom, a living testimony that knowledge could survive oppression if it were guarded with care and courage. As night fell, Sophia left the hidden chambers with her mind ablaze. The manuscripts, the lost cities, the calendars, and now the network of secret societies formed a tapestry of understanding. She knew that her quest had grown larger than she had imagined, and that to protect the truth, she would have to navigate this intricate web of guardians, always aware of the dangers that lurked in shadows, yet inspired by the knowledge that she was part of a lineage dedicated to keeping humanity's greatest secrets alive. The year was 485, and Sophia understood that the time had come to act. For years she had preserved manuscripts, deciphered codes, and followed the hidden paths of knowledge through lost cities, clandestine societies, and manipulated timelines. The wisdom she carried could no longer remain locked away, for it had the power to awaken minds and illuminate truths deliberately hidden from the world. Yet, she also knew that revealing even fragments of her discoveries would place her in grave danger, hunted by those who sought to control history and erase anyone who threatened their authority. She began to compile the manuscripts she had protected, selecting passages that could spark curiosity without immediately exposing her location. Each fragment revealed glimpses of lost civilizations, advanced knowledge, hidden symbols, and the orchestration of human history by those in power. Sophia wrote with care, knowing that these texts could ignite thought and questioning in minds capable of understanding, yet also aware that any misstep could lead the Church to find her. She distributed copies through the hidden network she had come to trust, using secret channels, coded letters, and trusted couriers who knew the stakes of their mission. As the fragments circulated among scholars, apprentices, and members of secret societies, Sophia began to witness the first signs of an intellectual awakening. Questions were asked in quiet chambers, debates emerged in hidden circles, and curiosity began to spread like a subtle fire through cities and towns. People started to look at the stars differently, to reconsider the histories they had been taught, and to explore knowledge that had been declared dangerous or forbidden. Sophia felt a mixture of exhilaration and fear, knowing that every spark of enlightenment could also bring a response from those determined to silence her work. The risks were immediate and tangible. Church agents had intensified their searches, and reports of her movements traveled faster than the manuscripts themselves. Sophia changed locations frequently, moving under the cover of night, hiding in remote monasteries, abandoned villas, and the safe houses maintained by the hidden network. Each step required vigilance and cunning, and she relied on her knowledge of symbols, secret paths, and coded messages to evade capture. Every day she survived was a victory. Every manuscript that reached the hands of a reader, a triumph against centuries of suppression. Despite the danger, Sophia felt a deep sense of purpose and connection to the lineage of guardians who had preserved knowledge for centuries. She understood that the fragments she shared were only a beginning, that true enlightenment would take time and patience to spread, and that her life remained intertwined with the mission of keeping wisdom alive. The balance between revelation and risk was delicate, yet necessary, for knowledge without action was as lost as the civilizations she had uncovered. By the candlelight of a secluded chamber, Sophia reviewed the manuscripts one last time before dispatching them into the hidden network. She knew that she had set in motion a chain of awakening that could not be undone, that ideas once released would challenge authority, inspire inquiry, and reshape understanding. And as she looked toward the horizon, aware that eyes watched from the shadows, Sophia embraced the peril of her path. knowing that the preservation and dissemination of truth demanded courage, vigilance, and unwavering dedication to the light of knowledge in a world ruled by darkness. The year was 486, and Sophia had vanished from the eyes of the world, leaving behind no trace of her physical presence. Yet her work endured, carried in secret by the hidden networks she had nurtured and trusted throughout her journey. The Freemasons, Rosicrucians, alchemists, and scholars who had guided her now carried fragments of manuscripts, coded diagrams, and maps of lost civilizations into safe hands across Europe. Her disappearance was not the end, but the beginning of a legacy that would ripple through generations, shaping understanding and curiosity in ways unseen by those who sought to control knowledge. The manuscripts she had preserved were studied in quiet chambers and candlelit libraries, their pages copied, shared, and hidden again. Each fragment contained pieces of a larger truth, ideas that challenged official history, revealed the hidden achievements of civilizations, and illuminated the manipulation of time and memory by those in power. Sophia's insight into the orchestration of the Renaissance, the lost cities, the preserved wisdom of the ancients, and the influence of secret societies provided a roadmap for future generations to explore knowledge beyond what was sanctioned. Her work became a lifeline for minds willing to question, to observe, and to think freely. Across cities and remote villages, apprentices and guardians carefully interpreted the symbols she had decoded, teaching the next generation to read the language of geometry, architecture, and manuscripts. They preserved her teachings in forms both hidden and indirect, ensuring that each revelation would survive attempts at erasure. Sophia's understanding of divine wisdom, of humanity's potential, and of the subtle mechanisms by which knowledge was controlled, became a guiding light for those who sought truth, even when the world around them remained ignorant or fearful. Her disappearance added to the mystique of her legacy. Stories circulated among secret networks of a scholar who had walked through fire, fled from execution, and yet whose presence was felt in every hidden library, every protected manuscript, and every coded symbol etched into stone. Sophia became a symbol not only of knowledge preserved, but of the courage required to protect it. Her journey inspired others to continue the work of safeguarding wisdom, to question history, and to seek understanding even in the face of danger. By the turn of each year, Sophia's influence spread quietly but persistently. The seeds of awakening she had planted through the careful dissemination of manuscripts and hidden teachings began to grow, forming a foundation for a renewed understanding of history, science, philosophy, and the divine. Humanity's awareness of what had been suppressed slowly emerged through the work of those she had trained and inspired. Sophia's legacy was not measured by fame or recognition, but by the enduring flame of curiosity and knowledge that she had lit in the shadows. Even centuries later, her story remained whispered in secret chambers, her manuscripts guiding scholars who would one day challenge accepted narratives. Though Sophia herself was gone, the wisdom she preserved continued to flow, like an underground river shaping the landscape of thought. Her legacy endured not as a single life remembered, but as a continuum of knowledge, courage, and revelation, planting seeds for a world where history, understanding, and divine wisdom could once again be explored freely and without fear.